welcome to my channel, Tragedy and Beauty, and I'm Pauline. Today I want to talk about how I even saw the first spirit that I did. This is something that not everybody wants to talk about because usually we don't, have any reference to it. It's usually when we've been somewhere and we thought we saw something. However, this day I actually was at work and I was getting through my day pretty good. And I was walking through the nursing station when I stopped to talk to a few people along the way and, see how they were doing as well. And we have a little passage that we go through that links us between the nursing station and the hallway to the patients. And everybody's surrounded in glass for germ protection, of course. So you can appreciate that. So as I'm walking through the entranceway, secretary being on my right hand side, and as I'm walking, something passes me on my right hand side, and I just kind of backed up against the wall and let it by, and I said, "Excuse me," and that's as far as it had gone. However, what I didn't realize is it was clear, it was white, and it was up to about my waist. And I just kind of thought, I don't know what that was. And first I thought, the brain said, that's impossible. But I stood there and I thought, what was that? Never really wanted to stand there and think about it very long before the secretary said my name. And she said, "Pauline, are you okay?" And I was like, "Yeah, why?" And she goes, "You look like you saw a ghost." And I said, I don't know, Bella, I don't know. And she said, "Well, you turned right as white as a sheet when you moved." And I said, "Well, yeah, maybe it was something," because I said, it seemed to me that it, it didn't feel like anything. It wasn't a person, but I said it was like a puff of smoke. And she said, "Well, I can definitely tell you it wasn't a puff of smoke, but whatever you saw, you turned white." So I thought, okay, thanks. And I just kept it in my head and thought, okay, let's figure this out later, but I got work to do. So I went on about my work and got through this shift and still thinking about it. And it dawned on me later that it must be something. So I just waved it off and thought, we'll give that another chance, see what happens. And it was shortly after that, days that followed, that I began seeing little white blobs. And actually, I could call them spirits, but to me, they were more like white orbs or that, or I had cataracts, one or the other. And they always seemed to be coming over somebody's bed and hovering. And I thought, no. So I started to be more cautious and listening and watching and smelling because this was not normal. I knew I wasn't crazy. But having worked in the intensive care there for probably already 8 or 9 years, it was just something that all of a sudden had started. Um, I really have not heard of anybody talking about these things. I have heard people say that they hear things at night, and I understand that now, um, but not in the daytime. Not with all the lights up. I've never really had that structure of something happening. So anyway, as I began to continue working shifts, different people would say, "Well, I had an incident once where I looked down and I felt something, and sure enough, it looked like a handprint on the couch next to me." So I said, "Well, maybe somebody was sitting with you. Somebody came to visit." And I was beginning to understand that a lot of people had seen things, but they really didn't discuss it with anyone. They kept it to themselves. So I thought, okay, we've got this. My favorite saying, like, calm down, it's okay. So anyway, sure enough, as the days went on, I just had a feeling about certain things. And if you're ever in, like you, if you're ever in a crowd and you hear your name and you look around and you're wondering who's calling me, that I've come to realize it's not that they're calling you to stand still or look, but they're actually giving you the warning to look around at something happening. And it could be as easy as, you could help the person that needs help, or that something was about to happen and they wanted you out of the way. In which case, I usually, if I hear that, I still turn around, I still look to see, but I know enough to get moving, like look for whatever it is. And usually it's an injury of some sort. And usually, yes, I can be there for their comfort or do the first aid treatments. But I've heard it in crowds, and sometimes it's somebody that is alone. And I can honestly say that because of the feeling that I get ahead of time. Um, there's people recently, for example, that I just came across. I was walking down this street in Montreal, and all of a sudden I had a big smile on my face because as I saw this elderly lady coming by, it was almost like a knowing. And I thought, she's pale, she's about late 80s, and she looks bewildered. So I smiled, and she smiled at me, and then she hesitated and stopped me. And I stopped and I said, hello. And she said, what's that stuff floating all over my face? And she goes, I brought my umbrella with me. And I said, oh, that. I said, that's part of a tree that's blowing. And we're wondering too what kind of a leaf that is. I said, do you know what kind of a leaf that is? And she said, no, but I've never seen it before. I was scared. And I said, you don't have to be scared, honey. We're all looking at that tree up there over the building. And I think it's coming from there. So she began talking, and everybody waited up for me, of course. And she just wanted to give me a little blurb on what she was doing today and things like that. And I think it was the fact that she looked so alone when I was passing her that I had to smile. It was just one of those God given things that you just do. Um, and I love the elderly because they have so many stories to tell. So, with that knowing and with orb finding at work, I was pretty used to the combination of somebody needing to talk and sometimes the orbs that come around those people. And it was always at the night shift that the orbs seemed to come. And they weren't, I wouldn't say big, but they're about the size of a 1 year old, that kind of a size. And they hovered over areas, over beds, over machines. And I began witnessing that the beds that they went to, I figured out it was the time on the clock, because they would kind of swirl around and hit a number. And of course, we have beds 1 to 12. So depending on where that went was depending on what was going to happen through the night. The doctors didn't really understand, and the nurses definitely didn't understand. And again, they just made fun of everything. Oh my goodness, like, I can't believe you're doing that again. And I'm like, I don't know. That's just all they're saying. So, sure enough, as the months went by, before anybody even went anywhere, they would come out and say, like, are we okay? Are we getting an admission? Are we getting trauma tonight? And I would look around and hold my gaze for a minute. And I went, no, it's really quiet. I think we're going to have a good shift. And I would go on my merry way. And we never did get anything. But if I took a look around, it was early enough that I could tell them before midnight what was going to happen thereafter, because they would land on the number of bed. And the doctors, residents, and interns began believing it, which was kind of cool because they knew enough to go get some rest and get something to eat before we got notification. And of course, it always came through the emergency room. So that's what they did. Eventually, it was people coming to me to say, my patient has a problem. They thought they saw something. Well, like I said before, if it was bed one, guaranteed it's going to be something coming from the ceiling. And a lot of times I had to go and settle them down, and they knew I believed them. I mean, I'd seen it. So other nurses were like, no, no, that there's nothing in there. I mean, I don't know what you're afraid of. Well, it's probably their loved one. It's probably somebody that they know, somebody that's passed away in this building. I don't know, but I know that whatever they say, and being, of sound mind most of the time for them, it's comfort to know that somebody's kind of looking out for you. And we had one gentleman one night who was post orthopedic, and he woke up screaming around 2 in the morning and to get this, come and put the light on, come and get this. And the girls ran in and they were like, what? And he was just shaking. And he said, like, that little girl, where did she go? Like, what happened to her? And the nurses looked and went, we can't have children under 12 in here. So we definitely didn't have a little girl. And he was like, she sat on the foot of my bed and she was staring at me when I woke up. And I was like, when they came and told me, can you go talk to him? I was like, absolutely. This little girl had gone from building to building. This is the same one that I'd seen in previous buildings within the city. And I can't say it's the same one, probably, but it's probably a younger youth that's passed away. And it was probably by trauma, because it seems like it wasn't women she ever sat on the bed from, it was men. It was like looking for a dad. And, it's one of those things, you have to put the light on, you have to explain, and you can't just wash it away because, you know, the hospitals, I'm sorry, but they're haunted. They are. And, the ones that I have done, which was over 12 hospitals in my lifetime and many, many nursing homes, this is pretty usual to see happen. Orbs aren't the only thing you see. Sometimes it's a sound, and it's a repetitive sound. And as I was working elsewhere one evening, it was probably about 2 in the morning, and we were getting to go to break. And as I was sitting there doing some notes, all of a sudden I heard a walker coming down the hall towards me. And as I did, I kind of reached up and turned everything off and waited. And I was wondering what was going to happen next. So I got up, went down the hall, looked around, and did round check on every room. I couldn't find anything. I really couldn't. So I went back, sat down, begun my paperwork again while the other lady was on break. And sure enough, I heard the walker again coming from room 10. And I thought, oh, really? I wonder who that is. So I got up, looked around, and this went on for a few nights, off and on. It didn't ring a bell. It didn't ring a bell to me what was happening. But I did tell a few of the staff, like, does anybody ever complain about somebody with a walker walking at nighttime here? And they started laughing at me again, and they said, no, but I think we know who it is. And I said, who? And they said, do you remember Elizabeth that was in that room before? And I said, yes, she was an older lady that had passed away from old age. And they said, yeah, do you remember she used to walk with her walker all the time? And hers was specific. When it hit the ground, it clicked. So you knew who it was. So they thought it was probably Elizabeth coming out to say she had to use the washroom, she needed help, she needed a drink. And that was usually about prime time that she would get up between 2 and 3 in the morning. So I finally settled myself down and thought, okay, we'll acknowledge that she's here and send her back to bed. That actually worked. I was able to say, Elizabeth, it's not time to get up yet, honey. You have to go to bed, okay? And I would just go by her door, open it a little because somebody else was already in there sleeping, and away it goes. And I was pretty happy with that because at least somebody had helped me figure that one out. And I really did believe, because she didn't want to go. She absolutely did not want to leave this earth for at least another 10 years. and it just wasn't time for her. She was meant to go at that time. And we had another person who he was elderly as well, and he was dying from heart disease, and his wife was always in with him. His children lived far away, so they weren't able to visit all the time. But he was a wonderful man. He owned a couple of major companies, and he had his private room, and everything was catered to him. And one night he woke up screaming that, "Get her out of here, get her out of here." And to the point where he was beginning to wake the next door neighbors. And I thought, oh, we can't have that. So I went in and turned the light on, and I said, "Robert, is there anything happening in here?" Like I said, "Do you have to go to the washroom? Do you need something to eat? What can we do for you?" And another nurse came in with me, and she listened, and he said, "No, but get that lady out of here. She's trying to take me." And I was, "Well, there's only me and this nurse here." And I said, "We're not taking you anywhere." But he said, "No, she's here. She comes all the time now." And we knew he only had a few days left to survive. So we were trying to give him, the best care we could. And he said to me that when I further asked what was happening, he said, "That woman that comes always comes in a black mink coat." He goes, "I hate her." Now, I don't know whether he's seen her before somewhere. It could have been on a movie or whatever. But up until the last breath, he swore that she was always coming to take him away. And there's nothing more we could do. We didn't have to oversedate him or anything, but we just tried to calm him that it was probably a relative past gone, like 2 generations ago. Maybe it was somebody he didn't even know that was his relative. So anyway, he finally passed away, but the look on his face was one of anger. It was almost like he was tortured for the last few days or since she had been coming. So I learned to be very sensitive of people who are having people or spirits come to them during their final days. This doesn't happen for most people. Most people are very comforted by their families because they will see them in the ceiling or in the light bulb or in the curtain or a reflection of something that we don't see. So I have to remember that we have to be kind to those type of people and to your loved ones who don't they can't really explain it unless it's directly their family. And then they see mom and dad, or they see their brother or sister, and we've come not to be quite so scared of little things that they say or things that we see. We know that their loved ones, especially where we work, their loved ones are going to be there. So if you like my videos, you can like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the other side. Thank you.